This will sound very strange, but in the 2009 movie Knowing, Nicolas Cage discovers that a document written by a child 50 years earlier is a code that foretells future disaster events. Before learning the timing of the end of the world, through this document, Cage learns the timing of the end of the world. But before that, he learns of the precise time and location of a major disaster on Manhattan Island in New York City. This movie, Knowing, is exactly analogous to what is occurring on this channel. This movie, Knowing, is a prophecy that is predicting that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan on May 4th, 2023. And there will be a massive evacuation of Manhattan Island. It is also likely that the official narrative in the mainstream media that will emerge regarding this event will somehow be a lie. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. Although it has been known since early 2021 that a dirty bomb would explode in Manhattan in the near future, as you can see in this email, this prediction for a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on May 4th was known since at least April 17th. There are also many other videos on this channel that make this prediction that were posted many days before this video was posted. Alright, as I mentioned at the beginning, the movie Knowing is a movie from God, and it is what is going on this channel. This channel is essentially the movie Knowing. In the movie, the plot, Nicolas Cage, he is a father he's a single dad, and he has a son that is in elementary school. And this elementary school digs up a 50-year-old time capsule. In the Bible, a 50-year period is very symbolic and very prophetic. In the movie, the son's name is Caleb, and in real life, his name is Joshua, which is a coincidence that aligns with the Bible as well, as it was Joshua and Caleb that gave favorable reports when they returned from spying out the Promised Land. The other spies delivered unfavorable reports. They offended God. God judged them for this. And so right here in this movie, with this coincidence of Caleb Joshua, we have right away judgment symbolism, judgment on America symbolism. The time capsule from 50 years ago contains sheets of paper that were put in it by all of the students from that time, I think it was one classroom, or maybe the classrooms in the school or something to that effect. But there were many different pieces of paper, each one from one student. And 50 years later, when the time capsule is opened, one sheet of paper is given to each student. And Nicolas Cage's son gets one of these sheets of paper, which he is allowed to bring home. The kids that received these papers and the kids that created them 50 years earlier were young kids, and so the typical paper is a poem or some writing or drawing, a picture of something. However, Nicolas Cage's kid is given a very different type of paper. It's just random, but he gets this really strange paper. And Nicolas Cage, that night, he's up late at night by himself. He's just sitting watching some TV, maybe drinking a beer or something, I forget. And he just casually picks up the piece of paper out of curiosity. Maybe it's on the coffee table or something, or on the kitchen table. But he's on the couch and he's got the piece of paper in front of him and he's just looking at it. It's very, very strange. It's unlike any of the other papers that the other kids brought home. This paper is just chock full of numbers, sets of numbers. And it's quite mysterious. It makes no sense. So as he's looking at the piece of paper, though, he is also watching the nightly news. And that day, I believe, on the news was a major disaster. It was a disastrous event. And Nick Cage just happens to be glancing down at the piece of paper, and he notices that The sets of numbers appear to be dates. They're numbers for dates, and also the sets of numbers contain the geographical coordinates of locations. And so the coordinates for locations are paired with dates. And it turns out, as he's looking at the paper and watching the news, he realizes that this disastrous event that they're talking about on the news is actually one of the sets of numbers, because the news event occurs on a particular date and in a location that somehow, I forget, I watched the movie a long time ago, that triggers something in Cage's mind, and he realizes that it's actually GPS coordinates, geographical coordinates, locations, and dates. And anyway, he realizes that the piece of paper has all of these disastrous events in history, these major historic events that were disasters. They're all on this piece of paper. He goes through things on the internet and he realizes and figures it all out. And the thing is that there are 3 sets of dates and locations remaining, 3 sets of dates and locations that are in the future, in the near future. And he realizes that this piece of paper that he has is a prophecy. It's a mystery how it came about, but he realizes that this is a prophecy, and the next event he predicts. He knows what's going to happen. He knows the location and the date of a disastrous event, the next one being in Manhattan. So he goes to Manhattan to try to warn people, and he is unsuccessful, but he is there to witness the subway train that derails and kills I forget how many people. The next event that occurs, he has the date and the location for, is on a highway somewhere, I forget where. And so he goes to the location and he figures there's going to be a major car crash. So I think, if I recall, he ends up holding up traffic or something to that effect. I can't recall if that's the case, but I think so. But it's not correct. What ends up being the case is a major disastrous plane crash. A commercial passenger plane crashes right next to the highway. And he witnesses it. He sees it come in and crash right in front of him. So, and then the final event is the big one, the last one, which is the prediction for Earth. He figures it out near the end of the movie. The location is actually all of Earth. And it's predicting, and he figures this out too, I forget how exactly, but it's going to be a major sun event, a cataclysmic eruption of the sun that destroys life on Earth, something like that. And the paper was delivered to a person in the class, one of the kids in the class 50 years earlier, by aliens. The aliens used some sort of telepathy to communicate these numbers to the girl, the student, the little girl, and she writes these numbers onto the paper that goes into the time capsule. All right, now there is all kinds of Christian symbolism in the movie. I recommend the movie. I highly recommend the movie, especially since this is what's going on here and this is a movie from God. But the producers of the movie knew full well that they were including a lot of Christian allegory in the movie. And for example, the aliens arrive just before the sun event and they take away the kids, which is why they delivered the message through the kids. Nicolas Cage's son gets taken by the aliens, but he's not allowed to go. Nicolas Cage isn't allowed to go. It's only kids that are allowed because there's only so much space on the alien spacecraft. But this is, anyway, all allegory for the rapture event that Christians are aware of or familiar with, most Christians, which is that God's faithful will disappear before the Great Tribulation period, which will be next year in 2024. And on that note, the sun catastrophic, not to the degree that it is in the movie, but there will be a catastrophic solar flare that will cause massive power outages, catastrophic power outages on February 22nd, 2024. That's what God's big picture of signs is revealing, which is the equivalent of Nicolas Cage's paper. And so anyway, the thing is that I watched this movie when I was visiting my friends, staying with them in St. Louis. And it turns out that I discovered, and I watched it in 2009, a few months after it came out, in March of 2009. But I learned last October in 2022 that this plane crash that I'm predicting will be Kamala Harris's death, it will occur in St. Louis. And that really was, I don't know the word for that, to learn that I had watched this movie in St. Louis and then later learn, and I had learned the connection with the movie Knowing and the plane crash, but I didn't know it was going to be personal and there would be this massive confirmation for my personal life, which is that I watched this movie in St. Louis, and through God's signs, no bias at all from my part, I learned that the plane crash is predicted to occur in St. Louis. So anyway, this movie is also famous in conspiracy theory circles for having supposedly predicted the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Because the first event, or one of the events that Nicolas Cage is watching on TV, I think it's the one that he's watching on TV. It's a disaster on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. And then exactly 13 months after this movie was released, which the conspiracy theorists don't know that. They don't know that it's exactly 13 months because they don't know what to think. But they know that there's a coincidence that can't be explained, and so they have a conspiracy theory worldview, and they explain it through that prism, which is incorrect. But anyway, this movie is famous for that, for supposedly predicting the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Now, the conspiracy theorists will say that it is what they call, quote unquote, predictive programming. So there are many of these types of coincidences, but because they may in fact even be Christian, but because they don't understand what God is doing, and they don't understand prophecy, and they can't fathom that God would do these things because of their lack of understanding of what God is doing with the meaning of life, for that matter, and how God would do such things. Disasters, evil, things that we would not think, most Christians wouldn't, and most people would think that God wouldn't do. And because these things happen, it drives many people to atheism. But there are Christians that think that these bad things happen because, well, it's just accidents or timing or our own sin or our own mistakes, etc. But no, God actually does these things. Okay? And he allows these things. Okay? And so that's their so if they're a Christian conspiracy theorist, that's where they go wrong as well. And so they don't know what to think either. And so they fall into the trap of the conspiracy theory so-called predictive programming explanation. But it isn't so-called predictive programming. There isn't a group of Illuminati that, make the movie Knowing and then do the oil disaster. That's, in my mind, absurd. But what else are they going to think? They don't know what else to think, so they think that. And also there's an element of Satanism, that's what's so if they're a Christian and they're into this conspiracy theory type of explanation, they'll also include some variation of how the Illuminati are worshiping Satan, and Satan is also telling them what to do. And anyway, so that's the background here for this movie Knowing. This video was produced prior to April 13th, 2023. If you want to understand and appreciate how the prediction that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan on May 4th, 2023 is known ahead of time, it is imperative that we learn about the numerous prophetic signs that occurred on April 13th, 2023. April 13th was the climactic penultimate date in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted date for the dirty bomb explosion and mass evacuation from Manhattan Island on May 4th, 2023. And to understand April 13th, 2023, it is imperative that we learn about and understand the trails of prophetic signs that God used to point to April 13th. Through each of these trails of prophetic signs that God used to point to April 13th ahead of time, God told a unique, amazing, and important story that everyone needs to know. This video you are watching will explain one of these stories and their related prophetic signs that God was using to point to April 13th and ultimately May 4th and the predicted dirty bomb and evacuation in Manhattan. May 4th, or the date 5-4, as we now know, hints at the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, the first black regiment in the Civil War, and the reason God has used this theme is because it conveys the theme of slavery and freedom, which is the overarching theme of the Bible and of this life, and the current end times spiritual battle, the battle to end all battles that we are all involved in right now. This is why, for example, on April 13th, the S&P 500 stock index gained 54 points, and the prophetic hockey game involving the team from Massachusetts had a final score of 5-4, which hinted at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. This is also why, on April 13th, the 21-year-old document leaker was arrested in Massachusetts 21 days before the date 5-4, which hints at 54. Arguably, the most important video on this channel, at least in regards to the prediction for the dirty bomb in Manhattan on May 4th, the date 5-4, is the 54th Massachusetts Regiment video. Once the prediction comes to pass, you should know that all of the videos on this channel should be watched. However, there are a few top videos, such as the 54th Massachusetts Regiment video, the East Palestine video, the Obama Returns to the White House video, the 3 Mile Island accident video, and the Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory video. As you watch this video that you are currently watching, keep in mind that it was produced prior to April 13th, when it was believed that it would be the date of the predicted dirty bomb in Manhattan. However, like I said, April 13th turned out to be the penultimate date in the trail of signs that is leading to May 4th. Now, the movie Knowing was released on this March 20th date in 2009, which is the spring equinox. And the producers knew that they were doing it, symbolically releasing it on this date, because this movie climaxes with the apocalyptic sun event, right? So that was the symbolism in the spring equinox, and why, I'm sure, I don't know this for sure, but I assume, of course, that that's why they released it on this date. If they didn't, it's from God as well. And it's also part of a trail of signs that isn't in this diagram here, that are spaced at 36 months intervals, including, which I didn't include in the diagram, which I should have, to this prophetic sign right here, which was the day that Obama's daughter arrived in Mexico on the same day as the earthquake. And I'll explain that in a minute. I don't want to jump ahead. But anyway, this right here is exactly 36 months. And I should have put that in there, but it's in another video. And then this is in turn another 36 months to the spring equinox in 2015, extremely prophetic. One of the most prophetic dates of all, in fact. And then that in turn is another 36 months exactly to the spring equinox in 2018, another extremely prophetic day. That's another story. Okay, and the reason for 36 months is a number of things. One, 36 is symbolism for 666, which in Bible prophecy is the number of the Antichrist. Because 36 is 6 times 6, but also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. The 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, all the way up to 36, equals 666. Now, another reason for 36 is that God's end times number is 2,520. It occurs in Bible prophecy. And also, 70 is extremely prophetic, and multiples of this 2,520 number are prophetic, and 2,520 divided by 70 is 36. Okay, that's another reason. Also, God's signature number is 7, and 7 times 360, which hints at 36, is also 2,520. And also, it's 3 years. Okay, now 3 years is also prophetic because God gave King Ahab 3 years after he repented before the judgment destruction of the kingdom in ancient Israel. And so it was exactly 3 months to the minute after Bill Clinton repented live on television and the news regarding his affair in the Oval Office with Monica Lewinsky. It was exactly 3 years after that to the minute that the last building collapsed on 9/11. Okay? So that's why 3 years as well. 36 months is 3 years. But so let's get to the beginning of this diagram here and begin this explanation for how this movie Knowing, and in another video I'll explain how it's predicting Kamala Harris's plane crash, and in another video I'll also explain in a different video how it is predicting the date of the sun eruption and catastrophic blackouts on Earth. Okay, but this one is predicting the explosion of the dirty bomb in New York City, and let's get into this explanation here and how what is being explained is in fact essentially the movie Knowing. It's numbers that God is using to predict these disasters and to predict his prophecy. It's more than just disasters like in the movie Knowing, though. It's even far more deeper and complex, and far more prophecy, far more Bible is involved. So this was the release of the movie date. Now, as I was saying, it's all about the paper that comes from the time capsule. And by the way, the time capsule, if you know of this, there was the time capsule that was retrieved from the underneath the statue in Richmond, Virginia, that was taken down in late 2021. And that connects. So that's a major prophetic sign involving a time capsule, and that connects with this movie Knowing in a very profound way. It's mind-boggling, which I'll explain in the other video. But anyway, it's all about the time capsule and the paper, and the time capsule comes from a particular school, and the school's name is William Dawes. William Dawes is like a Paul Revere. Paul Revere is the most renowned for the ride that he took to warn of the British invasion before the Battle of Concord and Lexington. Well, William Dawes did the same thing. He just doesn't have the renown in history that Paul Revere does. But he, like Paul Revere, warned of the militia of the coming British. Okay? And and it was the founding of that was in 1775 in April. And that led to the founding of the 13 colonies, which is why this is the first connection, 13 months. The date that the movie Knowing was released hints at the number of the Antichrist, 666, because 3 times 20 is 60, and that divided by 9 is 6.666, and into infinity. Okay, and the number 13 is symbolism for the Antichrist, and that's why that's relevant. Because the way God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works is it works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, and that's what makes it true and not a product of one's imagination, and it's what the Bible says is required, second and third witnesses to confirm a matter. It's also what makes this different and unique than everything else that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs on the internet. And in other words, what makes it true. Okay, and so this is a second witness, this 666 hidden in the number of the date, combined with this 13 months. But this 13 months is also combined with William Dawes, the name of the school, and the 13 colonies. But this will become more relevant in a minute because this connects to the day of the Boston bombing, which the Boston Marathon occurs every year on Patriots' Day, which commemorates the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Okay, so, and it was in 2013, another reason why the 13 months here. And this trail, as you can see, ends with 13 months as well. But anyway, the number 13 is the reason why it symbolizes the Antichrist from the Bible is that Nimrod A type for the Antichrist was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the month. And the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. Okay, so that gets us to the date of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Okay, that spill was on April 20th, 2010, exactly 13 months later. And by the way, this was also just days after Barack Obama, the Antichrist, became president in early 2009. Okay, which is why this 23 months here. Okay, because the number 23 is the number God uses to identify the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. Okay, now, so that's why it's exactly 23 months to the day of Obama's daughter in Mexico. Okay, and this prophetic sign in Mexico connects with this prophetic sign in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's very relevant, in fact, though it might not seem like it, but both the headlines were, the main story was about the Gulf of Mexico and Obama's daughter in Mexico. Now, the reason why this is relevant, I'll explain that in a second. Now, I should have put in below here, it was 17 injured and 11 deaths. If I'm not mistaken, it's the other way around, but it's really not, it doesn't matter. Because the 11 and 17 point to two things. One, H 1117. 11 and 17, H 1117. The 1117th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance, H 1117, is the word Bama. And God uses this frequently to identify the Antichrist, Barack Obama. Also, in Zechariah 11:17, it speaks of the Antichrist. God calls him his worthless servant in Zechariah 11:17. Also, the first mention of the word owl is in Leviticus 11:17, and Barack Obama was known for being a night owl. And there are other owl signs that relate to Barack Obama in God's big picture of science. Okay, coming back to H 1117 though, and by the way, Barack Obama released his prophetic book, A Promised Land, on the date 1117. That was in conjunction with the owl sign, the owl that was found inside the Christmas tree in the Rockefeller Christmas tree. That's explained in other videos, though. And so anyway, H 1117 is the word for Obama, and God uses this because the name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. And in Luke 10:18, Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. Barak means lightning. Bama means high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven. As, for example, it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place, a metaphor for heaven. And O, the language Jesus would have spoken, is from. So Barack Obama is lightning from heaven. Either Jesus didn't know what he was saying, or he said this even though there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Obviously, the latter option is the only one that makes any rational sense. And so that's why it was 11 deaths and 17 injured in this oil spill that connects with 13 months. But also on 9/11, it was Flight 11 that first struck the North Tower, and then 17 minutes later, the second plane struck the South Tower. And that's important for many reasons. One, it's a second witness because the world was shocked and confused after the first plane. But then as the world watched live, they saw the second plane hit 17 minutes later and were in horror. But it was confirmed then that it was terrorism, because before then they didn't know if it was an accident or terrorism, and that was the second witness. And so also the North Tower was destroyed before the North Kingdom was destroyed before the South Kingdom in Israel. And that's also why the North Tower was hit first and then the second tower. But anyway, it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that struck the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union in New York City, which is made up of 11 letters. And this is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for the nation to repent and to turn back to God. And so that's also the towers were struck in the high place, which is again 1117 or 1117 in Strong's Concordance. And that's why flight 11 and then 17 minutes later. But that's relevant because that's why this 1,991 days later it was the Boston bombing. Because God uses the number 191, and this is a variation of it, as 9/11 symbolism. And there's many examples. The Washington's Wall and Washington's Mount Vernon estate collapsed exactly 191 months after 9/11. And through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington. But that's explained in other videos. And so that's a second witness. This number of days connects with the Deepwater Horizon with the 11 and 17, which is 9/11 symbolism, and so is the number of days. So that's a second witness that confirms the matter. Furthermore, the Deepwater Horizon was officially declared to be sealed. The leak of the underwater pipe was officially declared to be sealed and the disaster over with on September 19th, 2010. The date 9/19, which hints at 9/11 and also importantly hints at judgment. Because from the Bible, the number 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. And the number 10 is symbolism for God's order. And so 19, which is 9 plus 10, is symbolism for God's perfect judgment. And so that's why the date 9/19 is very prophetic, and other signs in other years also confirmed this. And that'll be explained in other videos. But the official end of this disaster was on the date 9/19, and we are talking about adding 1,091 days to this disaster. Now, the Boston bombing and this West Texas fertilizer plant explosion 2 days later are two of these events that are coincidence that, again, the conspiracy theorists don't know how to explain, and so they attribute it to some sort of cooperation between the Illuminati and Satan. But it's not, it's from God. Now, the coincidence is the exact same disaster as the disaster drill occurs. The disaster drill occurs, and then right after or at the time of it, the exact same type of disaster occurs. And so naturally people don't know what to think about that. But that's God warning. It's a judgment warning. He's warning. The drill is a warning, and then the disaster happens. The drill is a preparation, right? It's a warning. What happened here was that the northeast region of the FBI had planned, I think it was a month after the Boston bombing, they were to conduct, I forget the name of the operation, but the scenario was terrorists leaving a knapsack, a backpack with a bomb in it at a tourist location at Fenway Hall, downtown Boston, and then an ensuing manhunt, which is exactly what happened after the Boston bombing. Okay, and then the West Texas fertilizer plant explosion. This was a massive explosion. It killed 15 people, destroyed many homes in the neighborhood, etc. Huge crater where the explosion happened. But at the same time, at the time of this explosion, there was this biggest ever emergency disaster drill in North Texas, 50 miles away, for the exact same type of scenario. Major disaster, casualties, big explosion probably, but the hospital, I forget the location, but it was just 50 miles away, and it was the biggest ever in North Texas history. That was going on at the very same time of the explosion. Another of these coincidences, and okay, this is what's happening with Obama's daughter in Mexico. Obama's daughter landed with her school classmates for a school trip, a school vacation really, in Mexico, southern Mexico. And at the same time, right after she landed, I think it was a 7.1 earthquake rocked the area, including where she was, which made it a big national news story at the time. Whether she was all right or not, it was in the evening news, etc. And it needed to be confirmed that Obama's daughter was fine, even though she was right at the location of the earthquake. Okay? But the coincidence is that this earthquake occurred literally 1 minute after this earthquake drill for the entire state. I think the state was Oaxaca. And the whole state, which is where the earthquake happened, was having an earthquake drill that day. 19,000 schools participated. And it was at 12 p.m. And the earthquake struck at 12:01 p.m. So that's quite a coincidence, especially since Obama's daughter is also there too. The most famous man in the world, the president of the United States. And that's one that God, through that, identified the Antichrist. Long story short, earthquakes in Mexico symbolize judgment on the other side of the border wall of security, which parallels the book of Joshua. Because the Hebrews marched around Jericho, the ancient security wall of Jericho, and then it collapsed in God's judgment due to an earthquake. And so the southern wall is symbolism. It parallels the wall of security of Jericho, the border wall of security of the U.S., and earthquakes on the other side are symbolic of the judgment on Jericho. There's so much more to that. It's explained throughout God's big picture of signs. It's very important. And by the way, that's why Trump's presidency was synonymous with his border wall of security. The Hebrews blew trumpets before the walls collapsed. Okay. And Trump is God's trumpet. In archaic English, the word trump means trumpet. Okay, so we've explained these now. These essentially occurred at the same time. The manhunt was also part of the prophetic sign, and it occurred on the 19th. So from the 15th to the 19th, the middle date is the West Texas fertilizer plant explosion. But also what confirms that they are one and the same sign is the fact that they both are these coincidences of these drills occurring at the same time as the actual disaster. Okay, so these are clearly tied together. Now, it's exactly 90 months after this to this explosion here. Now, this was predicted in advance. I predicted and made videos documenting this before October 17th, 2020. But at the time, I thought it would be the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. That's what I thought at the time. I didn't know it was going to be a dirty bomb explosion, or maybe I did, but I wasn't sure. Now I'm sure. But anyway, I thought it was the explosion in New York City because of the other signs that preceded it. And that's how God's picture of signs works. I can't know for sure because I can't see, I don't have enough information yet. The big picture hasn't developed enough yet for me to look further into the future. That's one reason why, the short-sightedness. But I knew that there would be an explosion on this day. I thought it would be the New York explosion. But some of the many reasons why I knew is because of the connections to these prophetic signs involving Harrison Ford. And so it was amazing that on this day, the national news story was this explosion in Harrisonburg, Virginia. This explosion occurred at the finish line of a marathon. At the time of the marathon, 3 people were injured. And in the Boston bombing, at the finish line of the marathon, 3 people were killed. And so that's just astounding confirmation of this connection of exactly 90 months, because this exact 90 months is essentially connecting to the Boston bombing. Okay, and so what else? This occurred, the students, it was a military marathon, but it was right near one of the founding presidents' names. I think it was the John Hancock University. I forget. I apologize. But it ties back to the founding, which is tying back to the Boston bombing. And there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there were students from that. Yes, there were students from that university. They were the ones that were injured. Okay, that's all. It's coming back to me. It's been a while. And the university, forget now the name. Sorry. But he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So that brings us back to this theme here and this trail of signs, which is ultimately judgment on the nation. If I failed to mention, I hope I didn't, 13 colonies in the founding of the nation, which is why William Dawes, right? I think I probably mentioned that. Okay, now God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. If you think about it, this would be the simple way for him to provide second and third witnesses is by pairing certain numbers together. Now, I'll just take a minute to play a pre-made clip of why God pairs 9 and 23 together, and then we will resume the rest of this video. Actually, just a couple more things here before we play that clip regarding the pairings of 9 and 23. I think I forgot to mention the reason for Harrisonburg is that it hints at Kamala Harris and the explosion of her engine on her plane that will cause her plane to crash, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist, which will symbolize when Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven, her fall from the sky in a plane crash, and then her replacement with the Antichrist will symbolize that. And that's why Harrison Ford. God is using Harrison Ford and his aviation mishaps to hint at the plane crash of Kamala Harris. Ford is the last name of President Ford was the only president to never have been elected vice president or president, just like Barack Obama will not be elected but appointed instead after Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Also, the location of Harrisonburg is pretty much in the flight path of Flight 77 on 9/11 after it departed from Washington, D.C. and then returned to bomb the Pentagon. And that is also pointing to the flight path of Kamala Harris when she will depart Washington, D.C. on her way back to Los Angeles. God uses the number 23 to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. In the Old Testament in the Bible, it is described how 2 goats were used on the Day of Atonement in the ritual on the Temple Mount. In Bible prophecy, there are 2 antichrists, and in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule the Temple Mount during the end times period. And the Antichrist will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ on the Day of Atonement in 2024. Goat is Antichrist symbolism. Goat stands for greatest of all time. And this is why the 2 goats of basketball wore jersey number 23, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. The GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, played for Chicago, and the GOAT Antichrist, the basketball president, is from Chicago. LeBron James is famous for being from Cleveland and having played for Cleveland and having won the NBA Finals championship for Cleveland, breaking the supposed Cleveland sports curse, which is Antichrist King symbolism, which is why LeBron James goes by the nickname King James. And this was used to point to the president Grover Cleveland, who was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, skipping the 23rd presidency, just like the Antichrist will serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 45th presidency. This is why Michael Jordan, in the exact middle of his career, after having won 3 NBA titles and before winning his other 3 NBA titles, retired briefly, and when he returned, wore jersey number 45 for coincidentally 23 games. And it is why Michael Jordan, in his last game as a Chicago Bull, another city God uses to point to the Antichrist, who is also from Chicago, scored 45 points against the team from the 45th state. Like Michael Jordan, LeBron James also played in Cleveland, then famously left Cleveland in much controversy, and then returned again to play a second time in Cleveland in order to win the championship for Cleveland and break the Cleveland sports curse, which symbolizes the Antichrist curse of Barack Obama when he will return to the White House for his second presidency, which is predicted to be on December 18th, 2022. When LeBron James returned for his second time to Cleveland, it took him 2 years to win the NBA championship. Just like when Barack Obama will return to the White House, he will be president for the 2 years leading up to the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ in 2024. God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together in order to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and became president in 2009. From the Bible, the numbers 9 and 23 both symbolize judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number. The only grandfather-grandson presidents were the 9th and 23rd presidents, William and Benjamin Harrison. The 9th president, William Harrison, died on the calendar date April 4th, 44, which hints at the 44th president. Harrison died exactly 1 month after his inauguration. The name Harrison hints at Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike, and the Antichrist Barack Obama will rise to power and become president again through her replacement. Michelle Obama will first replace Kamala Harris, and then Barack will replace Michelle. Michelle is the feminine version of Michael, which is the reason for the name Michael in the name Michael Jordan. In the Bible, the Hebrews crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Barack Obama's famous autobiography is named A Promised Land. Obama the Antichrist will promise the world a new world order utopia. A goat is Antichrist symbolism. The greatest of all time, the GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, wore jersey number 23 and jersey number 9 when he played for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team, a team that beat their opponents by an average of 44 points per game, which hints at the 44th president, GOAT Antichrist, that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. If you have not already watched the Michael Jordan prophecy video on this channel, the Michael Jordan prophecy video is an essential video for foundational understanding of how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. All right, from the finish line, it is exactly 23 weeks to this date here. Oh, that's a typo. That should be a 28, March 28th. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, this date was also predicted in advance to be the explosion in Manhattan, but it ended up being another step in the trail of signs. It was predicted in advance, in other words, and this was the day of the prophetic church bombing in Indonesia. Part of these prophetic church suicide bombings in Indonesia, including church bombings, which is explained in the Bali bombing video, which is a must-watch on this channel. So I won't explain any more than just that. It was 2 suicide bombers, just like in the suicide bombing in 2002 that killed 202 people. 2 suicide bombings, 2002, exactly 22 years before the second coming. But anyway, this was two suicide bombers. I think it injured 19 people. I forget how many were killed. But it's judgment for the church, okay? And Obama, the 44th president, grew up in Indonesia for 4 years. And that's also why this is relevant. And there were also other signs that made this relevant as well on this date, including the epic flooding in Nashville, the second wettest 2-day period of rain in Nashville's history, which pointed to the first, which was another prophetic sign in 2011, and on and on and on and on. So also that was in the 16th state, and 16 hints at 4 times 4, the 44th president. But that's why in Indonesia, there's much more reason for Indonesia, which is explained in other videos. But this is a judgment for the church sign, because as Peter said, judgment begins with the church. God is very displeased with the church. It's in fact judgment on the church that's coming. And the number 50 symbolizes the church. The Feast of Pentecost symbolizes the church. The Feast of Pentecost literally means 50th day. And also it is known as the Feast of Weeks, hence why 50 weeks connections. But also 50 weeks is also 350 days. And the 350th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for examine or judge. To investigate, examine, and inquire into, scrutinize, sift, question, specifically in a forensic sense of a judge, to hold an investigation, to interrogate, examine the accused or witnesses, to judge of, estimate, determine the excellence or defects of any person or thing, as in the church. Okay, so it's exactly 50 weeks from this prophetic explosion sign to the prophetic explosions that occurred on this date. This was the day of the 12 rockets that exploded right outside of the U.S. consulate in Iraq, on the same day that the Russian rockets exploded at the U.S. base in Ukraine on the border with Poland. And that's explained in the Obama Returns to the White House video, which is arguably the most important or the biggest explanatory video regarding this prediction for the dirty bomb in Manhattan. Make sure you watch that video. And like I explained in that video, this was the day that the 44-year-old GOAT of football, greatest of all time, announced with a tweet that he was returning for a 23rd season. This was the same day that the 44th president, GOAT Antichrist, announced with a tweet that he had COVID 23 days before he returned for the first time to the White House on the anniversary of his nationalized health care, which lines up with COVID, if you know what I mean, regarding the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, so that, and there's much more to that, which is explained already. But that is finally one last connection of 13 months, which is again symbolism for the Antichrist and judgment on the nation that was founded on 13 colonies, to this big history-changing event when the dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan on New York City, and there will be a mass evacuation. And so there you have it. There is how the movie Knowing is a movie from God, and through the release date of it, it's predicting this event, and the movie Knowing is about predicting disastrous events, and it's through numbers that are from, well, in the movie it's from aliens, but aliens are allegory for a supernatural origin, and that's what's going on this channel. The signs, the numbers are of supernatural origin. They are from God, and God has used the movie Knowing to demonstrate that this is what's happening on this channel. God is saying that this channel is the movie Knowing, and this will be proven with the prediction. That is the purpose for this prediction from God. It is to prove everything that I'm saying in this video and on all of the videos on this channel. There is also a lot of controversial information in these videos, and through the prediction, the controversy is ended. It's finished. That's the purpose of the prediction. There would be no purpose for the prediction if it weren't for ending these debates and controversies regarding these controversial subjects. That's the purpose of the prediction, among other things, including proving that the God of the Bible, the God of Israel, is the true God, and the only way to God the Father is through Jesus Christ and the repentance of sins. And so, that said, I'll end this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. Jesus died for you. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com.